Hi, Rahul here again. And I said I would do a tutorial about Photoshop, and it's primarily going to be focused around the rendering, texturing, and lighting, and how to create textures in Photoshop. And then once you've made your final render out of the 3D program, how to just touch that up to just really lift your final visual. As I mentioned, I'm going to be using Photoshop, but it doesn't mean you have to use Photoshop. There are other programs out there, open source programs such as GIMP. Funny name, I know, but yeah, it's called GIMP. It is open source and free, but I'm not going to teach that. I feel like Photoshop has become like the standard image manipulation tool, and if you're aiming for a job in design and not just for your own kind of personal development, you must get Photoshop. You must learn how to use it along with, I'm going to have to say, InDesign and Illustrator. These three packages, well, they're all one package, Adobe Creative Suite, but these three programs are just essential to know as you want to progress in the field of design. I wish it wasn't like that, but unfortunately it is. So these are some of the things that you're just going to have to work on as you make your way towards a job in the design industry. All right, I have two cameras here, so this is great. I've got a full casting setup now, so hopefully that improves the quality of my videos. Let's get right into it. We're going to be using FormZ, Photoshop, creating textures, creating bump maps, and I'll take you right through it all. Okay, here we are inside FormZ. Now, first thing I'm going to do is change my project settings, so File, Project Settings, and I don't want it to be in the default building size. I want to switch it over to small lamp size because that's the scale that we're going to be modeling today. What we are going to be modeling is a couple of oranges, or one orange cut in half on a chopping block. And then we're going to render that with a texture and a bump map. Right, first thing we'll do is make our chopping block. So I've got my primitive tools here. Let's grab a cube and make that chopping block just like that. That's great. Now let's make an orange. Okay, also great. Now, my orange is kind of sunk into the chopping block and it's a little bit too big. Now I can go and adjust that with my controls if I want. So that's great. Probably don't want it that big. About there, looks appropriate. Now, from a view that will help me, for example, the left view, I'm going to get my pick tool and just move it up by clicking and dragging and moving it up so it sits on top of my block. From this same view, I may need to lock it down, pressing F5. That engages this locking the plane so it doesn't change when I'm using the drawing tools. I'm just going to draw a line from roughly halfway, which is here, all the way across to here. Now the position of the line doesn't matter as long as it's drawn on that plane. I'm going to now grab my slice tool. That's this one in the modify panel, slice. And I already had this selected, so now it's telling me select wire objects to slice with, and that is a wire object. And you can see it's just gone and sliced right through the sphere. Now grab my pick tool again and delete this top half of the sphere. Just rotate to have a look. Now, one thing you've got to be careful of is that I want to have two different kind of pieces for my orange. So I want to have a separate top piece and a separate bottom piece. And if you had used your slice tool with this checked, it would automatically cap it, but I don't want to cap it. I just want to leave it unchecked. It'll just make texturing a little bit easier if you have separate faces. So I'll just leave that unchecked and then add in a cap using the cap tool. So just cap that. It'll ghost that. So what I'll need to do is just unghost the bottom half and, sorry, oops, redelete the top half. All right, that. Not sure what's going on here. I just want to unghost this bottom part here. Okay, that's better. Yeah, so ghosted objects is a thing that FormZ does. They can be annoying at times, but they can also be super useful. Like if you need to, say you do an operation, you need to get back the part that you cut away, you can always just go back to your ghosted objects. But one thing I like to do as I'm working in FormZ is to just make sure I'm deleting anything I don't need, and naming things that should be named. So this one, for example, is my chopping board. I'm going to name that. This one here is that line. Absolutely don't need it anymore. So I can just delete it by right-clicking and going to delete. This is the bottom half of my orange. So just going to give that a name. And this will be the top half of my orange. Okay, great. Switch over that plane there. And what I'll do is select both the top and the bottom half. And, oh no, wait, no, I won't do that. We'll get straight into creating the background, I think. If I bring up a Google and just Google Photography Studio. Oops, my spelling is bad. Let's take a look at the image results here. And now you'll see in just about all these photography studios, there is a curved white surface there. And that curved white surface gives you a seamless background. I mean, look at this car. It's being shot under lighting here, and you can see the curve here. So it just gives it a beautiful, seamless backdrop. And that's what we want to create exactly in the 3D render program. A lot of what you do in 3D render programs is trying to mimic what you would do in real life to get the right lighting. All right, so let's create that. So I want to go into a left view here and get a spline tool and just draw my spline, clicking here, about here, about here, and then just going up and creating a nice kind of infinite background here. Might just want to go back to my spline tool and get it quite high so it's right out of shot, and double clicking to end. Okay, so what I have is this nice line now, and I'll move it over. I believe that's going in the right direction. So about there's good. And then I will extrude that. And I want it to be really long so that it covers the entire shot of my camera. So zooming back in, you can see that right now it's covering everything, but I'm not quite in a nice perspective view. So let's just flick over to display and, sorry, not display, view and 3-point perspective. And that will allow us just to see things in a better angle. Okay. That's looking pretty good. Okay, pretty happy with that view. What I want to do now is start to bring in some textures. Now, I've gone and used Google and downloaded some textures. For an educational purpose, that's okay, as long as you reference them. From a professional point of view, you really, this might be a camera 2 time. From a professional point of view, I think you really have to build up your own library of legit textures that you either create yourself in Photoshop, using, going out with a camera, or buying them from any texturing site, or downloading ones that are license free. You can't just go and select any old image that you find on Google and just use it in your 3D work. Everything needs to be licensed. Now, it's probably unlikely that you'll ever be pulled up, but imagine like you do some work for a client and, for $2 or $5 you could have paid for that texture. Suddenly you're in a whole lot of trouble because you've breached someone's intellectual property. So my advice is to create your own textures, to get either download license free, and there's plenty of freely licensable texture packs out there, and there's plenty of resources that you can find, and I'll put some links up as I collect them for you. All right, back to modeling. Now, as I said, for educational purposes, it's perfectly fine just to use what you can find on Google. Let's go to Material 2, double-clicking that, and let's click Texture. And I'll load in my texture using this folder button and click Load. Now it's on my desktop.
And I've got a texture of an orange. Let's load that in. There it is. Okay. Now everything went to that. So I might just put material 1 back on here and that back on there. Now you can see, and also back on the lower half. All right. Now, this is a problem that I find I have with forms here. Like I can't zoom in. It seems to be at the extent of my zoom. If you just go View and Home, it will kind of reset your view, and you might be able to just zoom in much easier. Okay, that's better. Now, what I'll need to do is use the Edit Texture tool, which is in this panel here, Edit Texture. And you can see, you might have to zoom out to find where those controls are, but for me, they've landed up right here. That's great. Now, I want to use this diagonal one here, and drag that out, and that'll drag it out in a uniform way. And just dragging it out till it gets to roughly the right size for the orange face, and then repositioning it so that it covers that. And just continuing to adjust it till I get it exactly right. What I don't want to have is any kind of whiteness or grayness there showing. So just dragging that out, and that's looking good. Just need to slightly adjust positioning. Ooh, just a little bit more. And that's looking pretty good. There might be a little bit on that edge. That's looking good for me for this. Now, let's create another material here, and just a plain color, double click the color, and bring up a color wheel, and choose orange. And let's drag that in underneath here. Great. Now, I'm going to select both of these, both the top and the bottom piece, and duplicate them by using the Move tool and making sure copy is on, and just duplicating that over here, going into a left view, and now using rotate and turning copy off. So I don't want to make another copy of it. Just want to rotate this one ever so slightly. Because, you know, an orange, when you cut it, just wouldn't sit perfectly. It will look too silly with just sitting perfectly on the block like that. So just rotating it around, looking good. Now, let's give that a quick render. So just going to go to 3-point perspective and just get a reasonable view and just quickly render that. Yeah, looks all right. Let's get our wood texture. So material 4, and same process on the color one, going over to texture, loading in a texture, and we load in our wood texture, which I downloaded from the internet. I'll make these available for you online. There we go. We'll load that in. Oops. Do that again. Open. Okay. Got our wood texture, and let's drag that onto here. Now, again, we've got to use our Edit Texture tool. And this time, we'll just click on this outer ring and rotate it until it's in the correct orientation for us. Then I might move this, let's see, move it down to this corner, move this box. And what I'm going to do is adjust this point out to here, and that point looks okay. So let's give that a render. A couple of oranges on a chopping block. Right now, everything looks pretty flat. So the next step I'm going to demonstrate is how to create specularity, how to create bump maps. By bump maps, I mean like by creating surfaced kind of dips and peaks that look like, you know, it's going up and down, but it's actually not there in the model. It's just something done with data we create in a Photoshop file. All right, let's get straight to that. So what we do is fire up Photoshop, and we open up the same textures that we downloaded. So I'm going to open up that orange texture and the wood texture. So let's go to our where we have those files, and we'll open up that one and that one. Okay, great. Let's do the orange first. Now, what we need to do, camera 2, what we need to do, maybe even camera 3, what we need to do is create some black and white data where the black is where it will appear to go down in the model, and the white will remain neutral, and gray will be somewhere in between. So basically, we need to make this colorful image into a black and white image that FormZ can use to decide, how to interpret the ups and downs of that orange. Now, if we look at this orange, we can see that in this part there is a kind of place where it goes down, and also maybe in these lines here, and maybe little other parts of the orange, but maybe in here a little bit too. So what we need to do is go Image, Adjustments, and remove the color, and we do that by desaturating. So Image Adjustments and desaturate. Now that would work okay, but we really need the blacks to be black and the whites to be white. So let's go Image, Adjustment, and Levels. And this is a levels box in Photoshop. And what we do is we adjust the blacks by sliding this slider over, and the whites by sliding this slider over, and the midtones by sliding this one. Now that image gives us a good contrast between blacks and whites, but they're in the wrong way. Because remember what I said, camera 2, is that the black will go down. So what I see here is not quite right. Let's go Image, Adjustments, and Invert. Now that's looking good. This area will go down. There'll be some areas in here which go down a little bit. But what I don't want to have is this area to go down. So that's easy. All I need to do is make it white. So I just get a brush, not that big a brush though, and just brush in some white into these just to remove that bit there. A little bit of black around some of the parts is not going to hurt me. So just brushing that away. Just leaving a couple of speckles. It's fine. All right. Doesn't have to be too exact. That looks good to me. Remember, it's the black parts of the image that are really important. Now we need to save this file, Save As. And I'm going to save this as a PNG file because PNGs just seem to work better for this type of bump map. And give it a name that makes sense. Call it Orange Bump. Great. And no compression, thank you. Let's do the exact same process for the wood, but I don't think we'll need to invert it for this one. So Image, Adjustments, and desaturate. Image, Adjustments, and Levels. Blacks to black, whites to white. Okay, somewhere in that kind of spectrum. Just drag the midtones over. And that'll give us these nice grooves, give us these nice scratches in the wood. Okay, great. And then File, Save As, PNG, that'll be fine. No, let's not replace it. That would be a disaster. Let's call it Bump. Okay, done. Now, camera 2, that was pretty easy. It wasn't too difficult. The difficulty would become if you using GIMP or some other program that's not Photoshop. Just trying to follow the steps that I did in a different program might be a little bit tough. Okay, let's close down Photoshop and come back into FormZ. Now, let's grab our orange material, double-clicking on that. And now we need to go into Render Zone. So right now we're adjusting the shaded properties of the material. I want to adjust the Render Zone properties. That gives us a few more options, one including Bump. Let's change Bump from None to Bump Map. Go to Options, and load in the texture that we just created, which I think I called Orange Bump, funnily enough. That's it there. Okay. Now, you'll need to adjust this smoothness and amplitude to something that makes sense for you. I'm going to go to like say 16% smoothness and 20 amplitude, and that will increase the depth of the bump map. So for this example, I'll just increase the amplitude up quite high, so it'll exaggerate the effect so you can see it. Okay, and let's give that a render. So you see instantly the orange has become a kind of more 3D object. That part where the black was, it's gone down. You can see these little bumps now in my texture, and none of this was achieved with modeling. It was all done with texture. So I think we can, lower that down to something more reasonable, and not something as ridiculous as what we had. Okay, I think that's subtle. That's nice. I like that. Great. Now let's do the wood. Same operations. Grab our wood material. Oops. Grab our wood material and flick over to render zone. Grab the bump map, and we'll load in our bump map. We don't want to have an orange bump map. We want to have a wooden bump map, which is that one. Okay, similar kind of amplitude is good for me. Give that a render. And you can see now that our wood comes through with these nice looking scratches and marks and grooves, and it's just looking more like wood. Final thing I'm going to do is adjust my background gray material. It should be white, but we just can make a couple of little adjustments just to make it a little bit more white. So make sure the color is white, that's okay. And in reflection, let's change the diffuse factor to much higher. And specular factor just down a lot more. And that should give us a much more white material. Okay. I think my shadows could be adjusted a little bit, so I'm going to go to my sunlight and edit this. You didn't see me edit this before, but I did. I changed my shadows to all these settings. I'll change them back to what they were originally, which is hard ray trace shadows. So if I do that, you'll see these shadows come in much harder. There they are. But I don't like that because it doesn't look convincing to me. Those shadows are much too hard. So I tend to go for a much more softer shadow, and there is a sweet spot there I think that works, which is around, so soft map shadows and high quality and a smoothness of, something around there. Just to soften up the edges of those shadows. That's better, right? Okay, now it's a matter of finding a view that's kind of like, a bit more dramatic than what we see here. We can do that a couple of ways. I'm going to do it by going view and view parameters. In this box here, we can see the focal length. So if you imagine a camera, a DSLR camera similar to this. This one is a 10 to 30 millimeter lens, which is roughly what that one would be. But perhaps I want like a wide angle lens. So to do that, you just drop the millimeters down of your lens. So something like 11 millimeters would be how they do those really wide panoramic shots of buildings. But that's too extreme, but I think somewhere in the range of like 24 could work for me in this. It just widens up my lens. So that's looking good. And just position my view to something that I like. Okay, that's good for me. Yep. And now I want to, before I do my final kind of render, I would like to maybe just soften up my sunlight a little bit just by just taking a look. If there's a couple of options, we can just lower the brightness down perhaps, maybe like 90%. Okay, let's take a look at that. Yep, that's all right. And to get my final image size large enough so that I could just say print it out or put it in an A2 presentation, I need to go to display and image options and I can set my size here. Right now it's doing the window size, which is that. You can use a custom size, and I'm just going to go quite large, like 2400, just to give it big enough so it's a high quality render. And then that's good. Now we'll just give that a render. I love how fast Fonzie renders things. Looking good, looking good. And then to save that, let's go File, Export Image, and we'll export it as a PNG or a JPEG. And I'll call it Orange Render. Awesome. All right, so next step in the next video will be photoshopping that final image just to give it that final little icing on the cake. Okay, I'll see you then.